Dear students, my name is Dr. Srinivas Goli. I am an assistant professor in Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Under UGC E-Pathashala program, today we are dealing an important paper in population studies, paper on population structure and characteristics. Within this paper on population structure and characteristics, we are dealing a module on a very important gender issue is called patriarchy. Patriarchy is a single most social system guides human behavior across the societies in the world. It is also called a single most social problem, rooting all the gender issues. So, under this important topic, patriarchy, today we will learn following concepts. First, the concept of patriarchy itself. We will deal about this particular meaning and definition of patriarchy. We will see the theories around origin of patriarchy. We will also discuss on the forms and structure of patriarchy. We will discuss implications of patriarchy, also the changing dynamics and transformations in patriarchy from earlier societies to the modern societies. So, this is the order of our discussion. So, let's move to the concept of patriarchy. Patriarchy has been defined as a system of social structures and practices in which men dominate, oppress and exploit women. In her book Theorizing Patriarchy, Walby defined patriarchy as a system of social structures and practices in which men dominate, oppress and exploit women. Patriarchy is originated from the Greek word pata, derived from patris, showing the root, meaning father, and archy meaning rule. So, patris meaning father and archy meaning rule. The term patriarchy distincts from patrilineality and patriarchality. So, patriarchy means the father rule. So, descent forms from the male member of the households. The root of all human culture which forms gender inequality is the patriarchy. So, the patriarchy is the root of the gender inequality. Patriarchy, a single most life-threatening social disease assaulting the male body and spirit in human society, as Bell Hooks defines in a book called Understanding Patriarchy. In her book, The Creation of Patriarchy by Gerda Lerner says, the manifestation and institutionalization of male dominance over women and children in the family and the extension of male dominance over women in society in general is led to the patriarchy creation. Patriarchy has no gender. Patriarchy affects both women and men. Particularly, if you see, women has to follow or perform certain roles as their feminine gender. The similar way, men also as prescribed to perform roles as the masculine members. The origin of patriarchy. In this particular topic, origin of patriarchy, we will deal on certain concepts. First, what is the origin of women's subordination? As it existed since the beginning of human society, since the origin of private property or the state or the agriculture, what did men gain? When did men gain the power? The origin of patriarchy has number of theories, starting from biological theory, which describes man is the hunter and dominates, Darwinian social biology theory, which is also called evolutionary biological theory, economic theories of patriarchy, cultural constructive social biology view, and working hypothesis. These theories we will deal in detail in another module on origin of patriarchy or patriarchy theories. So, in this particular module, we just discuss on the working hypothesis proposed by Gernot Lerner on patriarchy. According to her, patriarchy may even have had a different origin in different places. So, patriarchy is not originated at a point, rather it evolved over the time. So, it evolved with the civilization and it took different forms and it operates in different forms and it has different structures, different languages in different societies across the world. Within the country also, the patriarchal norms, patriarchal traits, culture is different in different societies across the different castes, so across the different religious groups or tribes and across the different geographical regions. In her book, The Creation of Patriarchy, Gernot Lerner says the radical reconceptualization of Western civilization that makes gender as a center to its analysis. She argues that male dominance over women is not natural or biological, but the product of historical development begun in the second millennium BC in the ancient Near East. As patriarchy as a system of organizing society was established historically, she contends it can also be ended by the historical process. Focusing on the contradiction between women's central role in creating society and then marginality in the mean giving process of definition and interpretation, Lerner explores such fascinating questions such as what can account for women's exclusion from the historical process. What could explain the long delay, more than 3,500 years, in women's coming to consciousness of their own subordinate position? She goes back to the cultures of the earliest known civilizations, those of the ancient Near East, to discover the origin of the major gender metaphors of Western civilization. Using historical literature, archaeological inputs, and artistic evidences, she then traces the development of these ideas, symbols, metaphors, and their incorporation into the Western civilization as a basis of our understanding on patriarchal gender relationship and patriarchal gender values, traditions, and cultures and languages. In outlining the historical process of creation of patriarchy in the metaphors, Lerner describes our growing awareness of the fact that crucial to the organization of early metaphysicism. She had puzzled by her evidence wherein women seem to have greatly differing statuses, some holding high position and enjoying economic independence, but those whose sexuality was controlled by men. So it is not that those women who are socially deprived, they are facing problem under patriarchal system, but also those who are in higher economic status are tended to also face the oppression by patriarchal system. So whether it is the higher class women or it is the lower class women, but in comparison to their male counterparts, they are playing only just subordinate role. This led her to recognize that there was a need to look beyond economic questions and focus on the control over women's sexuality and the manner in which reproduction was organized, and thus look for the causes and effects of sexual control. Under this particular issue, the origin of patriarchy, overthrow of mother's right, the world is the world historic defeat of female sex. As Friedrich Engels points out in The Origin of Family, Private Property and State. So, according to Engels, the denial of rights to mother, denial of rights to women is an historic defeat of female sex. In particularly, the emergence of private ownership of the resources, private property and family formation, which actually led to the male dominance within the household and led to the division of labor. Agricultural surplus has led to male control over private property and searching for the descents in the form of male lineage. This led to women to confine to household chores, and slowly it is developed a hierarchical system within the household and slowly subordinated women to confine a role to the household itself. What actually men control in patriarchal system? This is an important question to learn. Women's reproductive labor power, or women's reproductive process, or women's sexuality, women's mobility, property and other economic resources, economic, political and religious and social cultural institutions. Yes, in patriarchal system, men controls all of these women's functionalities, especially women's reproduction, women's sexuality. Often we see in all fertility decisions and choices, whether it is number of children or with preference for certain child sex, we often see men's dominance and men's preference dominates over women's preference. Also, women's labor power. The difference in women's labor force participation and workforce participation today is a critical indicator of these consequences, that men controlling women's productive and labor power. Due to men's control of women's productive and labor power, women often confined to household chores and devoid from her economic power or access to economic resources. Another important thing is controlling women's sexuality or sexual roles. It is often men who makes decision on women's sexuality. Another important thing is women's mobility. When did women can move out, when did cannot? Not only the timing, but also the choice of mobility is completely controlled by the men or any elder members of the family. Even in the passing of resources and rights of economic resources, women obtain as discriminated. Women, in many countries, women does not have property rights until recently. Whether it's a land, house or any other property, the name on which these property are registered are male compared to male. This is an important indicator of how women is discriminated under patriarchal system in society. Women often are devoid of positions under various economic functions. Not only economic functions, but also political function. Under patriarchal system, women were not given political rights. Only in 1920s, the majority of the countries started getting the rights, voting rights for the women. Even today, at many temples, at many religious and rituals and functions, women are not allowed. It is not only the religious function but also across the social and cultural functions. In many cultural institutions, women has no space. But patriarchy operates not in one form. Patriarchy operates at various levels. But the 6 structures which Walby proposed are very important to understand. In a patriarchal relations, Walby says the mode of production, paid work, state, male violence, sexuality and cultural institutions, which is the pillars of operating patriarchal system. The mode of production basically kept women out of the productive labor force. Often her work is not counted as a paid work. Women do a lot of work. Even certain economists counted that women do the entire labor time of women and annually is 70% compared to 30% of women, but majority of this particular time is not counted. Often a patriarchal system is owned and supported by the state. For example, in many Central Asian countries, the state propagates this patriarchal system, it supports the patriarchal system. Male violence often has been not given enough attention under legality. Only until recently, for example in India, the gender-based violence, domestic violence has been legally declared as a crime. Only in the year 2005 we formulated the laws. And sexuality is often, women's sexuality is controlled by men, as I have discussed earlier. And in any cultural institution, women was not allowed. So the discrimination operates at a different level, but the major discrimination is at the 2 places. One is at the workplace and another is at the household level. Even women is allowed to go out and work, but women as her functions, her productive functions and labor is controlled by men at the workplace. But not only at the workplace, but also most importantly in the household level, women has a subordinated position. If you classify entire these structures of patriarchy into various groups, one can say that one can describe these structures in following ways. First, unequal pay, abuse, unequal gender roles or subordinated gender roles, objectification of females' roles and attitudes, unrealistic standard of beauty, that often male is described as a muscular and women is described as a weak and beauty on the name of beauty. Rape culture, male dominated industries, often the working industries, occupational types are gender based. Until in 20th century, the certain occupations even not allowed for female. For example, women were not allowed to become pilot because they have some biological functions, because they have some natural cycles and they menstruate, and so their behavior is abnormal to perform functions like pilot job. So this is just one example. Like this, there are a number of jobs occupations where women is not allowed. Until long time, women were not also not allowed to military jobs or police jobs, and in many places. There are also gender stereotypes. There are a number of gender stereotypes used, which we are maybe in the coming 2 slides we will deal about this. And also there are separate languages used to describe male and female activities and male and female functions, which are a part of patriarchal structure. And negative female portrayals, that is always the weaker man has been derogatorily described as the feminine because he is weak. That's the way the female sex has been mocked. So these are some of the structures of patriarchy, how they operate in a society. For example, there is a, as I said, there is a gender stereotypes and a gendered language which is used to describe the patriarchy. For example, boys don't cry. This means because boys always as described as a masculine and well-built physique, and they are courageous, so they don't cry. If somebody cries, they call it, okay, are you a girl to cry? Don't act like a girl. This often described to the weaker masculine or males. Women realize quite late. This also sometimes is like it is mocked to describe women's behavior. Don't listen to women's advice. That's often usually a derogatory way to describe women's function. Patriarchy against the both sexes. It is not just this. With the previous example, one can understand that patriarchy is not just affecting the female, but also it affects both male and female. Why patriarchy is bad for men too? That is important to know. Often men has a gender-based roles. The gender-based assigned to men. If they fail to perform it, they have been considered as a weak masculine or weak men. For example, men role is a sole responsibility of earning. If a male person is not earning enough, has been looked at within a subordinate or with a weak, looked at as a weaker man. Men also have a responsibility or a role of protecting the family, protecting the female members, protecting the children. Display of masculinity through the producing kids. Often important males are mocked. Display of masculinity being a physical and emotionally strong. What happens when men fail to fulfill these gender rigid laws? They are subjected to shame, disgrace and mockery. Traumatized through labeling such as important, feminine, henpecked, chicken-hearted, feeble, coward, worthless and so on. Patriarchy often operates through the other social institution, which we call intersectionality between patriarchy and other social institutions. As I told in the previous slides, that patriarchal culture or patriarchy operates differently for different social groups. Different social groups intersect with the patriarchal culture. Thus, different social groups have different patriarchal culture and traditions. Different religions have different patriarchal structures and patriarchal traits. Thus, one can say that understanding patriarchy, one needs to look at patriarchy through the intersectional approach. But over the period, patriarchy is changing. Dynamics are changing. For example, the traditional patriarchy, which is in Indian form, the Brahmanical patriarchy, are moving away, and they are also re-emerging in the form of a capitalistic patriarchy. Scholars like Uma Chakravarti has been nicely described how the Brahmanical patriarchy was operated in India for so long. But the recent scholars like Einstein Jilla has been developing the concept of capitalistic patriarchy, particularly to describe the women's discrimination in the modern industries. Although women is educated, women is coming and participating in the various jobs, but still they are playing a subordinated role to men. This she described as the capitalistic patriarchy. Occupational segregation, confining women to certain jobs and certain activities, and double burden of economic activities to women, and women has to perform a dual role as a wife as well as an earning person. So she seen this particular attitudes as this particular structure as an over exploitation of women under the capitalistic patriarchy. So with this re-emergence or the changing dynamics of patriarchy, how do we see future of patriarchy? When we say the future of patriarchy, when we say the patriarchy is ending, on what social institutions the future of patriarchy depends? Does it depend on religious and cultural of the state, community, household, individual, and their attitudes towards women? Patriarchy will go or it re-strengthening? A question need to be further examination. The way Jilla Einstein explaining that the patriarchy is re-strengthening in the form of a capitalist patriarchy often force us to believe that patriarchy is re-strengthening. Male-dominated patriarchy or gendered patriarchy. This is very important concept because today the patriarchy inculcated, the patriarchal socialization is carried out just not by a male members but also elderly female members. Elderly female members also inculcating the socialization of patriarchy in the younger children right from their childhood. And if you particularly look at certain evidences like the son preference or daughter preference from the National Family Health Survey or any other data sources, we often see that the mothers also equally prefer sons compared to daughters, which says that the patriarchal culture inculcated not only by male members but also the female members. So in this context, how we see the end of the patriarchy? What is the end of patriarchy? Is it that when women have equal work, health, education and political status, are we see this is the end of patriarchy? Or the patriarchy means, end of the patriarchy means the equal autonomy, agency and empowerment? Does these terms fully represent the women's status? That is very important, which these particular terms we will see in the next modules. What for we are fighting? Whether we are fighting for equal right or equal position or domination. So if the women's empowerment, women's movement or feminist movement are fighting to overthrow patriarchy, are they fighting for equal right, equal position or domination? What are the regional interpretations of patriarchy? That is very important to look at, because as I said, the regional structures of patriarchy are different. The kind of patriarchy we see in Western Europe or Northern America is not in the Central Asia or in South Asia. We have seen different patriarchal structures. But module on patriarchy will be incomplete if you not deal about matriarchy and understand the difference between patriarchy and matriarchy. So the module 21 must be read along with the module 19. So now we deal with matriarchy. By definition, the matriarchy is the rule by women. Matriarchy means a social system organized around matrilineality and goddesses worship in which women have positions of power as defined by Barbara Epstein. Literally, matriarchy means government by mothers or mother broadly, government and power in the hands of women. Or more broadly, the government and power in hands of women. In the Marxist traditions, matriarchy usually refers to pre-class society, where women and men share equal in production and power, as cited in Margot Adler in 2006. By matriarchy, we mean non-alienated society, a society in which women, those who produce the next generation, define motherhood, determine the conditions of motherhood, and determine the environment in which next generation is raised. Matriarchy can be thought of as shorthand description for any society in which women's power is equal or superior to men's, in which the culture centers around the values and lives even described by feminine. Matriarchy is not opposite to patriarchy, as always it is misunderstood. Matriarchies are not a mirror of the patriarchies, but rather matriarchy emphasizes maternal meanings where maternal symbols are linked to social practices influencing the lives of both sexes, where women play central role in these practices. In true sense, matriarchy is the power is actually shared between sexes. In a true sense, matriarchy is the power shared between the two sexes who are each perceived as taking and nurturing the role in their different spheres influence. Three types of symbolic structure representing gender in partnership societies: egalitarian, direct, and matriarch. Egalitarian gender differences are not symbolically marked, although sex differences may play a role in division of labor. Diarchy is a pervasive system of symbolic gender dualisms, whereas the matriarchy is based on the maternal model. In all three structures, male and female functions as the two equal halves of the larger whole and neither dominate each other. Matrilineality, a system in which a clan's name and family titles are passed through mother's lineage. Matriarchality is the kinship structure of social system where mother assumes prominence. Matrilocality is a way in which matriclan lives together. The existence of mother's rights are there since the origination of human civilization. People consider matriarchy is older than patriarchy. Matriarchy is a motherly beginning of human existence. The term was originated from matter, the mother, and arc, beginning origin, rather than that means mother's role, as I said in the first slide. Civil rule by women was overthrown and created the divine father principle. That is, always people, the scientist or anthropologist, sociologist, consider actually the early civilization as dominated by matriarchy and which over the time replaced by patriarchy. The transition in society from matriarchy to patriarchy happened over the as the civilization progressed. Matriarchy is an alternative, parallel, or an opposite culture to a contemporary historical patriarchal culture. During prehistoric society, women produced children secretly without having any linkages with the men they had sexual intercourse with. Paternity discovered the relationship between sex and pregnancy and monopoly over the women and children. Matriarchal references also there in the theologies or mythologies of the various cultures like Greek mythology, Indian mythology, Iranian mythology, ancient and Egyptian mythology, European mythology. The evidence for matriarchy was also still existence in India. For example, if you take the Thodas in Tamil Nadu and Nayars in Kerala, also Garo in India and Garo Kasis in India are the societies still which practices matriarchy, and some kind of evidence we have seen in the matriarchy. So students, both matriarchy, patriarchy are coexist in the societies, but mutually simultaneous existence is not seen in the contemporary societies. But there are still the evidence that in certain primitive tribes and tribal areas we see still the practice of matriarchy. So I hope these two modules will help you to understand these two concepts and the difference between these two concepts and how they differently affects the women's status and subordination of women, and thus the position of women in the society.